This conference will
Hey,
now be
somebody's got
recorded.
to. So if you got a question, either you can put it in the chat or just ask. If I get to rambling, just let me know. Um,
There is a little
again,
wave your hand down in the bottom left-hand corner. Raise your hand and we will try to help you.
so welcome again. Like I said, there's some new faces. Before we get started, if anybody's got their own questions, we'll give you an opportunity now to get them out. Aubrey, if you've got some great information, or just tell us to keep going.
Keep going.
Yep, that's what I took that as too. So, well, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. And everybody see the slides for today's session.
Looks good.
So today, oh, back. Today we're going to do some troubleshooting the common issues that we have. I know I've seen them. I know we've all pretty much seen them. So let's. Uh, so we've got common flubs that we run into. So some electrical power, double engraves, curve, wide curve, partial engraves, wavy engraves, power settings, the inability to engrave at times, and just some general once-overs. So let's move. So one of the biggest things that you may run into is you turn the main power switch on the side of the machines and nothing happens. Check your e-stop. So the big red button on the top. Um, make sure you're flipping both switches on the side of the Novas, turning the key on the bolts, and then again verify that e-stop. This button's probably caused more panic than anything else in the laser industry. So again, for the bolts and auroras, you may exhibit some signs. You know, lights will come on, but nothing else is going on. So make sure that you check that e-stop. I know on one of our auroras, if you barely touch it, it's got a short in it, and I just been too lazy to fix it. It will trip it. So make sure that if you don't have electrical power right off the bat, you uh, start by checking your e-stop.
And many people, we asked them to check that, and we didn't hit that, we didn't touch it, and come to find out, oh yeah, I remember I laid something down. It doesn't take much. It's an emergency stop, so it is.
The cat stepped on it. I've seen that before.
Yep, cat steps on it. The kid walked out to the garage and walked by and slammed it. So you don't know. A quick twist will verify.
And you can make fun of yourself after it happens, because I know I have.
The
So let's
part is
what's that?
the e-stop has a little bit of spring to it, even when it's pressed. So people think, "Oh no, it's good to go." Twist it.
Yes, definitely give it a twist. So, okay, we've all seen this. We've all had this happen somewhere along the way, probably. You get double engraves. So when you start seeing it, it's nothing to real panic about. But first thing we need to do is check the scan offsets or the reverse compensation settings. You'll see that, like in this photo here, the scanning offsets are in millimeter or in inches. So if you put them in inches instead of millimeters, you're going to get some of the same issues. Not quite the double engraves, but you're going to get some weird engraves going on here. So we need to make sure that the scan offsets, they're entered in millimeters and not inches. And then ensure that the enabled scan offset is toggled green. I've seen that sometimes, especially on ours. Like, what's going on? Where did they go? Scan offsets disappeared, or it wasn't toggled on for some reason, when in reality it should never be touched. but we have noticed that. So, and also saving your scan offsets to some folder on your computer is a fantastic thing. The way you can just quickly load them and keep going with your day. Um, and then go ahead, Chris.
So yeah, a couple things to note on that. They come on a gold card with your machine, usually packed with your keys. They also come as a screenshot from RDWorks on your thumb drive. And it is possible that they are loaded onto the memory on the controller.
And they're in the easy button device profile import as well.
Yes, there's multiple ways to access them other than the gold card. But if you've had to make changes, make sure that you resend and overwrite the files to the controller. If you're not doing this, then the controller's not registering that the offsets are in there.
The scanning offsets are applied to the file, so that's why if you ever look at your screen, excluding the Bolt series and the newer GT5 screens, you'll see that it looks like it is jagged. It's because it's implying these mechanical offsets to the actual file. So there's nothing wrong with their screen or with the file. It's just applying these to it.
And like if you do a drastic speed change, I know a lot of people like to pause the jobs and do a drastic speed change. The offsets are basically built into how the lines are drawn inside of the RD file that's sent to the machine. So when you do a speed change, those aren't accommodated. So, fraction of a millimeter can give you bad edge quality, right? So keep that in mind.
Any other questions on double engrades? Let's talk about wide kerf. You see in the photos, you've got a really wide square versus and it says out of focus, a little fuzzy on the engrave. So when we look at our kerf, and the kerf refers to the width of the laser beam as it cuts through the material. So whatever the materials that is being removed, saw blade, the kerf would be the thickness of the blade, whether it's a table saw or bandsaw, but the laser is the actual beam itself. When you're properly focused, you're at the thinnest portion of the smallest spot size of the thinnest portion of that beam, and that's what's giving you the detailed engrave or that thin cut or score line that you're looking for. If it's out of focus, that means you're either too close or too far away, causing that dot size or that beam to be a little bit bigger and not giving you the results that you really want. You want to make sure that you found the optimal focal distance so that you can get those thin lines and not be out of focus. Now, there are times for engraving that you want out of focus. You want that dot size to be a little bit bigger so that it overlaps or cleans up something else. But when you're specifically for cutting, and especially when you're trying to do inlays or something of that nature, you want the tightest beam signature possible. That way your pieces fit in there. Inlays are a whole nother subject that we're not going to talk about today. So
I think some of this is common for new users because they read the buzzword autofocus.
Mhm.
They think the machine, hey, I hit the start button, it's going to autofocus. You still have to manually initiate that autofocus routine to actually get your focus set. So they start a job with the head 2 inches away from the material.
Yeah, and something to compare it to too. If you've ever used a magnifying glass on a piece of paper, you have to get that perfect distance away for it to be able to burn the paper. Well, we're trying to get that perfect distance away for the lens too, to make that smallest dot or the most dense dot, so the most concentrated power to get through the material.
this also, when we talk about kerf and focus, this applies to all lasers across the board. It's not just the gantry machines. The UV, if you don't have that proper focus, then you're not getting an engrave, or you're engraving the wrong side of a piece of glass. So take into account that focus, and other means. But specifically, this one is discussing the wider kerf. When you get these big, heavy black lines, and that may only be a millimeter or 2 millimeters out of focus, but ramp test will be the one to help you figure out your optimal focal distance. This one's always fun. Partial engraves or glitches. The root cause being somebody hit start Lightburn and did not send to the controller. This has been known to cause all kinds of issues, and you can see here, even on the display, it shows where pieces and parts are missing or what's not cutting out here. So make sure you're always sending. Shift plus send is another option instead of just send. The controller. Let's make sure that the controller is not full. I think we've had it once or twice where the controller's been full and it just acts a fool. So there's two methods to do that. You can go into the controller and do it, or you can go into Lightburn and clear the controller. I think either one works. Chris, do you want to hit that formatting?
Yeah, so if you go into your file, and we actually have a video on how to do it, it's really quick and easy. You're going to go into the file, you're going to go to, I think, erase memory or format memory, and there's a slow version and a quick version, kind of like a quick format and a low level format. And we're just bringing it back to zeros and ones for the most part. And that's going to not leave any data behind. And that's usually the best way that I found, just to make sure.
So for Galvos, it's a little bit different. Excuse me. So the Galvo, where we're used to a gantry and we hit send, all the data goes to the controller, you go to the controller and you run the job. The Galvo constantly streams data from the computer to the machine. Macs run into an issue here with the USBs. They want to fall asleep or they don't want to get powered fully. So there's configurations inside of a Mac computer to keep your computer from falling asleep. I've seen this one. It's always fun when, or you have a screensaver that comes on after a couple of minutes, and then the next thing you know, you've ruined some coin or a piece of glass because the data stopped and nothing happens.
Yeah, I've done a couple of coins like that where it fell asleep, and I'm a third way through, and I'm like, what the heck happened?
And we proved that when I got when we got the Aurora, the 50-watt fiber. It's like what is going on here? So trying to fight the computer to get it to stay awake and constantly stream the data. So that could be another cause for partial engraves or glitches. Also, depending on your length of USB, what is it, 15 feet is pretty much the normal without having it powered.
Yeah, and it can also depend on if you got a bunch of junctions. I believe George's got a hand up question.
George,
So I
what you
just
got?
wanted to ask, guys, when you're running multiple lasers out of Lightburn, I've been able to keep two stable connections simultaneously, one to my Nova, one to my UV. But now that I have a third laser, can I really run three lasers at the same time off one instance of Lightburn? Or should I really start looking at a second computer that's dedicated for the third machine?
I know
Well,
for me, the two Galvos go into one laser. It's either one or the other. It doesn't seem to want to work that well, but I could be doing something wrong, Chris.
yeah, you can set it up, but you got to be familiar with how Windows, at least, or how Mac is assigning the serial ports and making sure you pick those. It's definitely a lot easier if you're Galvos have different controllers in them, like a V4 versus a V2. It's easier to separate things out. Otherwise, they kind of look the same. Now, for your Nova, one, you should be on Ethernet, and you should be sending the job down. So at that point, you don't have any more going on.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty simple.
realistically, you should have multiple windows of Lightburn open because of how the graphics work in Lightburn with the origin of the machine. You know, these Galvos are center origin, and your Nova is going to be a top left. So as you pick and choose between the two devices, you often see the graphics will mirror and flip. So you should already have multiple of those open. But it really comes down to OS limitations, probably more so than Lightburn's limitations.
What I'm really curious to see, like how far I can push it, is let's say I'm running a job for 50 tumblers. Each tumbler is getting a different name. So you preload the Excel spreadsheet so you could do the name after name. And really what you do is you just send it once to the laser and then you just hit next, 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 next. Simultaneously, I want to make sure I can run either the UV or the light.
Yeah, I would prefer to have.
A second computer at that point.
Yeah, one you can park that computer closer to the two Galvos for proximity and cable length issues, less likely to trip and knock the cable out. But you know, on the Windows side, you can get one of those brick computers for $100. So that's not bad to get that set up and configured. And you got 3 seats with your Lightburn license. So you could actually have one per and then use remote desktop or VNC type software to actually operate from one computer, but you've got all your other ones actually out there that you're controlling from your remote computer, but they're still natively connected to each machine. So a lot of ways to do it.
Good, George.
George is
Okay.
just looking for a reason to buy another Mac. Just,
So
and
maybe go ahead,
he's going to
Chris.
go to
I'm
the
sorry.
boss. He's going to go to the boss and be like, look, they told me on the webinar I need to buy another Mac.
Mac
So
Minis are great.
So Wavy and Grays. We've seen them. These are great and interesting when you didn't realize what was going on. But the first thing we need to look at is whether the lens or the mirrors are seated in the housings and they're tight. You can see the shifts in this image and the shifts here. They look to be sometimes right along with each other. If the lens or mirrors loose in the housing, they'll move around and it causes the wavy and grays. If you're running fast enough, you can also hear the lens ticking and moving inside of the tube. If your lens is secure, it's not loose or rattling around, your mirrors are secure, then we want to look at the roller bearings to make sure that they're adjusted properly. Now you should be able to turn the machine off and use your finger, give or take, with very light pressure and roll them.
The bearings,
Yeah.
yeah, with it powered off, I would say medium pressure at least.
Okay.
So that you can move the head around. If it's light pressure, it makes them spin. They're just a little loose at that point.
Yeah, you really don't want to be able to spin them freely.
Yeah, the same price is right.
So that takes care of wavy engraves. What else we got? Power settings on engraving. The famous triangle with speed, power, and lines per inch. So your speed, power, and line per inch will play the integral role in your engraving. The faster you go, or I should say, the slower you go, and the higher power, and the more lines per inch, you're going to get the darkest engrave possible, or burnt through your material. When you start figuring that, okay, 500, 400, 600, something like that for speed is what you're happy with, and then you start looking at your power settings and which setting is going to give you the best, and then start altering your lines per inch. helps you figure out your depth and your color of engrave, for lack of better words. Now, with the fiber and the UV, we have to incorporate frequency and Q-pulse into those variables. If you don't count for how long the light's on and how fast it's turning on and off, the time it spends on and how fast it's turning on and off, this is also going to mess with your engrave quality. Chris, you've done more with the Q pulses and the frequency with the MOPAs and the UVs.
Well, I mean, the only thing that I can say is that on on the Novas, or the Bolts, it's very easy to create one of these tests, one of these light burn material tests. But when we get into the fiber and the UV, people kind of get lost because there's so many variables. So I tend to keep a static something, whether it's I'm going to stay at 500 millimeters per second and 20% power, and now my variables are going to be my frequency and my Q pulse, because I need to know what they're doing to the material. I could easily create a 500 millimeters per second and 20% power with a huge range of frequency and Q pulse, and then create another one just by copying that test and changing the power to 30 and then changing the power to 40. So I'm creating multiple tests by keeping something stagnant. One's going to be a change, and then the other ones are the variables of the test. So yeah, it's not easy, but once you get the concept of it, it becomes a little bit quicker to dial stuff in.
So again, and your frequencies. If the lower the frequency, the more you're going to want to dig out. So, I always like that analogy of a low frequency is going to be more like a backhoe or a bulldozer. A medium frequency is going to be somewhere like a shovel, and then a higher frequency is going to be kind of like your push broom. What you're wanting, how much material that you're wanting to take off.
And I've noticed quite a bit that as the frequency goes higher, to achieve your goal, the power has to come up too, just because it's the the pulse is so much lower. So we need more power to compensate. Otherwise, we get zero result.
Which has happened at times. So power settings for cutting, understanding that, the power when performing cuts and scores, your min and max power. We've seen it numerous times. For engraving, your min and max power need to be about the same. But for cutting or scoring, you need to have a lower minimum power than you do the max power. The Nova series, especially for the bolts, min and max, there's no variance because of if I'm right, the firmware and the way it acts. You keep min and max the same for your cuts or scores on the bolt.
Correct. And I would say Lightburn it used to be something totally different. And it was told to me a long time ago that the minimum power did not matter on fills, but that is also something that they have recently discovered, keep them the same as well. So if you're doing fills, 20% min max all the time, but it does see min max power for your cuts when you're talking about the Nova series, at least with that firmware.
So you want to keep the minimum power anywhere from, we've got 3 to 20 points below. So if you're running 100%, let's just say 50% power, then anywhere from 57 to 30 for your min power. I know that we've typically kept it 5 to 10, but the variance of 33 to 20 is proven that on certain instances you may need a little bit more. You reduce the charring in the corners by keeping your min power a little lower. Just like the analogy of going into a curve, when you're driving into a curve, you let off the gas, and then you come through the curve and you give it more gas. So you need to reduce the power when you're making a direction change with the head. It's probably the easiest way to put it. The small tight curves, I know that one of the designs that Chris, you came up with, that square and circle sitting on top of each other, is a fantastic way to test this and to test cuts because of that shape. So getting too aggressive with your a low percentage of power for a cut can result in the laser completely missing. We've seen, and this comes down to you're running 80% power, max power with 0 on your min or 5 on your min. Sometimes you're not able to even excite the tube because of that reduced or that low power. And again, it prevents charring and burning in the corners for tight radius or radii. Some general things we look at: optics. Keeping your optics clean definitely promotes positive results. We see it all the time. We see it daily, engraving stuff. If your optics get a little dirty, then you're not going to get the best results as possible.
Actually, I'd like to hit something on that real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
And Chris could probably back this up or maybe expand on it a little bit. But as far as optics and mirrors, we know that the mirrors are taking away about 3% of power. Now, don't get upset. We test, your machine at the output before the lens. So if your mirrors are dirty, if they're corroded, if they've lost their reflectiveness, you're losing even more power. So this is probably a very good place to look to see if you are losing more power just because it's absorbing now more power from the beam.
That's a good point.
And that's also why they got different mirror types as well, because some of them actually perform better from a reflectivity, but you trade off durability, right? So do you want higher performance? You'll have mirrors that you'll be replacing more often.
And vice versa at that.
Yeah.
It's up to me to decide, or you to decide, or whoever, how you want to spend your money on that type of, if mirrors are inexpensive enough that you can replace them every 6 months or every year versus the same mirrors that we've been running for over 3.
Well, we have the Nova series with primarily all of those. We can polish those. I polish mine all the time. Bring them back to a nice luster. Go ahead, Myers.
Yeah, that'd be the old MO style. The new ones are those SI whatever.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit softer surface, lighter weight mirror. Not necessarily as good as the MOs as far as robustness, but they reflect better. So more optical efficiency. And yeah, that polish strip does it real nice on those MOs mirrors. You can recover something like a Thanksgiving pumpkin pie.
So with the mirrors, the alignment, you may be, the alignment absolutely matters. You may be, just barely off, and you're going to lose power. Even, and the worst one is mirror 3 through the lens. You're not center of that lens. You're reducing power based on how far you're outside of center. And I don't know the numbers. We all know I don't do math very well, so. But if the beam's not in the center, now does it have to be specifically in the center of the mirrors? Some people may say yes, some people may say no. As close as possible works, the most of the time. But the key to centering is from mirror 3 through the lens.
So the optics are curved, right? So not the mirrors, but the lens is curved. So if you're not hitting dead center, it is driving that laser in a different direction. And it's tuned or ground. It's ground crystal, so it's ground to be its highest performance through the center. So we don't want to misdirect it. And we definitely want the most performance out of it. So getting through mirror 3 and out the center is critical. I mean, that's mission critical, because now we're, if we're not centered, we're clipping the nozzle, which is basically a pinhole. And now we're bifurcating or splitting the beam in multiple directions, which, definitely don't want.
This also rolls into your focal distance. Ensuring that you got that proper focal distance, that you want to utilize that beam to the fullest, no matter what you're doing, whether you're engraving or cutting. That's why we change focal distances. We make sure that they're, I don't want to say exact and perfect when we're cutting, to get that small kerf from that fine beam, but you want, you back them off or narrow them to get the results that you're looking for based on that dot size of that beam. I know, Chris, you've run those tests on glass and found that 2 millimeters off the, if the Nova normally focuses anywhere from 5 to 7, and you're proving that if you drop it down to, say, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters off the surface of glass, it reacts differently with the glass.
Yeah, and it is dependent on the glass, but it does, the beam interacts differently. And, the beam is basically an hourglass. So we got a cone coming down to a point, and then the point goes out to a larger cone quickly. But yeah, that interaction by changing the focus is incredible. And you wouldn't think so. And I think I happened upon it by accident one day. But it was like somebody sandblasted it instead of that micro fracturing you normally get.
That also goes, into cups. I think tumblers, some people will, let's defocus it by 2 millimeters away. So you're doing 7 or 6 or 8 to get that specific results that you want. We found running ramp tests that all of our machines, 5 millimeters is the optimal for cutting. It gives us a nice tight kerf. We can do inlays with it. But also air plays a factor into some of this. Properly adjusting your dual air, it keeps the lens cool and clean, as well as providing results for your engraves or cuts. This is, I don't want to say this is, sometimes can be extremely an arguable topic, but you look at, generally use low air for scoring or engraving and high for cutting. Sometimes I know Lois will switch to high air for scoring or low air. It really depends. We've also seen that, everybody talks about low air for tumblers. So white tumblers, we found that if you use low air on some of them, you get this brown, sappy looking goo around your engrave that doesn't want to scrub off. Most likely it's because that powder coating is getting too hot, causing it to melt up a little bit or to bubble. If you flip to high air, it keeps the surface cool, and we don't have that results. So you don't have to scrub off all that residue or hope that the white powder coating has now turned, a cream or a tan that just won't cut off. Material, I see it all the time. We've done it. MDF or medium density fiberboard. It's horrible for the lasers. It's sawdust and glue. Some brands, some colors cut better than others. Plywood, interior versus exterior plywood. Hardboard, if you're not familiar with hardboard, it's kind of a dark brown. It almost looks like MDF, but it's a little bit different consistency. We found some that have smooth on both sides or textured on one side. Some cuts better. I've seen 1/8 of an inch not want to cut, and 1/4 of an inch cut great. Solid woods versus the man-made woods, they all have their quirks. The manufacturers can randomly change their formulas, which, you know, this batch is, or this lot number has cut great. I just went back 2 weeks later, they've got more sitting on the shelf, and then it's not cutting. Something may have changed. You know, lot numbers change, and, you know, as production runs happen, things happen. So we kind of got to play with the settings and realize that it's not the laser, it's the material that's changed.
Yeah, and you're always going to have probably a little scrap piece left over somewhere that you keep in a pile. You know, if you're having issues with a similar material, test it on a previously successful material to make sure that it does work. And then you'll know right away. But, you know, I had a customer bring in MDF. It was proof grade from Glowforge. Bought 400, so she bought $400 worth, so a pallet worth of this proof grade MDF, and she couldn't get through it with her Glowforge. And brings it here, I couldn't get through it, and it was 1/4 inch, mind you. I couldn't get through it with my 130. It just burnt to a crisp as I tried to put more power and lower speed to it. So it was just the glue and the mixture that they use. It was impenetrable by the laser. So materials play a huge role, and you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's one day, and then they restock from another supplier the next, and you don't know.
Well, we've seen it, and we sent you samples of it, Chris. But when you got the UV, you know, and I go back to ebony. Everybody thinks that 3 millimeter thick or 2 millimeter thick material, the laser should be able to cut through easy. Solid ebony at that thickness does not want to cut on any of the CO2 lasers, and you still got a piece of it. So, you know, the only way we've found to cut it is the ultraviolet laser. That Aurora 8 UV is the only thing that we can use to cut that material. Even the 130 watt laser doesn't want to cut through it. So it's not the lasers, you know, it's just, we know it's the material. Now let's talk about unable to engrave. Oh, I am so guilty of this. It's quite embarrassing to watch this, you know, or read this one, especially when I've done this so many times. Is, you know, you'll find that your graphics are what's causing your problem. Having a duplicate shape on top of each other on your project. And this happened to me not too long ago. I could not figure out why it just wasn't engraving or wasn't going to do right. And then it turns out I had 2 of the same images stacked on top of each other. So if you find this, that you have maybe multiple layers, you want to click on the shape, not drag across it, but just click on it. If you have marching ants, then you have the one shape. If you don't have marching ants, then there's a duplicate behind it. The preview window in Lightburn, they gotta tell people this now. I didn't used to use it. I look at the preview window to see what it's going to do, so that I understand how the head's moving or which way the beam's going or whatnot. And again, most of the time, the machine's doing what you told it to do. It's doing what Lightburn tells it to do, and you tell Lightburn what to do. So if you're telling Lightburn to do something that, you know, not right, then it's going to prove it when you start looking at the preview. Myers, you got?
Yeah, so there's also an option to use that filled smooth under the window, like toolbar up at the top, where you can tell it to actually fill it couple things I don't like about that is when you're trying to manipulate graphics and stuff, it can be a pain with clicking things because of the way it's rendering. And then it also gives you a false sense of what your settings are. So no matter what, like if I had this circle at 10 LPI, it should only have like 10 lines or whatever. But with Filled Smooth, it just fills it up completely. So it's not an exact representation of your LPI settings, which can be your quality, like on text and everything. If you have a low LPI, you get junky quality. But with the Filled Smooth, it'll make everything look nice. But it does give you the idea of, hey, do I have duplicate shapes? Then if you start moving the shapes over the top of each other, you can see how the Boolean fill works with turning on and off and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool.
So we've pretty much gone through everything. Again, in conclusion, first, don't panic. It's usually just a simple fix. And most of the time we fall into these quick fixes. No power, check your e-stop. Double or funky looking engraves. Let's check your scan offsets to make sure they're enabled. Is your focus set right? Make sure that you send, do not start. Check your optics. Look at your settings, and then look at what the remaining variables are. And I think this is, sometimes we panic. Oh God, I've got a $10,000 machine and it's not cutting this $5 piece of material, so it's got to be the machine. But it turns out that it's the material, or you didn't have your air set correctly to get that engrave that you're looking for. And any questions? Going once, going twice. Whoa, here we go. You're welcome, Sarah. Sorry, I'm trying to read. So what you'd love to see is customers and about to add a third laser. Congratulations. The more the merrier, if you ask me. You want to see videos for these problems simulated and fixed. So I know that I've looked at some. I've looked at doing some. I'm just petrified to loosen up a lens and just to give that type of engraving, and then my luck, I screw up a lens. What you got, Chris? You look like
No. One, kill the share. Two, yeah, I mean, we can. There's definitely some of these things that we can replicate fairly easily. Some of them have multiple situations where it's not as easy to do real time. So yeah, I mean, the loosening up the lens, I could care less. I'll loosen my lens up and run it. I've done it before, so you can hear the video that we have online, and a lot of the stuff already exists. We have a lot of videos covering how to fix things and common problems. But yeah, if there's anybody in the industry that attacks some of these common issues head first, it's us. We have requests and we have an issue and we don't have a video or an article for it, we will make it right away. So yeah, I like the idea.
Anybody else with questions? Tom, what you got? Anything? Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, I just want to let Chris and Chris know I saved you email support. My bolt would not turn on, and sometimes it would turn on, and then in the middle of a job it would shut off. So I was wiggling the cable, and the blue connector that plugs into the bolt, I took that apart, and one of my wires, the neutral, the white, I believe white is neutral, slid out of the connector. So I just reconnected it and my bolt turns on. So you don't have to worry about email support or going on Facebook and saying my bolt won't turn on. But I typically try to fix all this stuff myself and look at videos before I ask questions. But in this case, when I could wiggle the wire and the bolt would turn on and off, I took the connector apart and I found that the wire slid out of the connector, and I stripped it a little bit more, stuck it in, and tightened it up, and now it turns on and stays on.
Thank you, Tom, for being proactive in doing that. And that's a testament, actually, because when I first started, I knew nothing about these machines, and I just did, you know. And 10 years ago, there were no videos and resources, and nobody would share information. It's just, you know, it was carefully guarded secrets of the industry. So, I mean, I encourage people to mess around, search, look at documents, watch videos, do everything that you can on your own, so you know what you know. If you're driving a car and you know how it handles in a corner, you're going to drive so much better than if you're very cautious and you know, you never kind of push any of the limits.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. You know, I always try to look up if I have a problem. I look it up on the web and see what I can find. And I can usually almost 99% of the time fix it on my own without having to ask questions or email support, unless there's a, you know, catastrophic event that I don't know about. But I've worked on my Nova 24 and the Bolt and fixed them. And I mean, even with Chris Myers, I put in my external air connections into the Bolt, and I did all that on my own, and it worked fine.
Yeah, I mean, there are things on these machines that are difficult for the standard person to figure out, and that's what we're here for. But there's a lot of things that you can research and do first, you know, to provide us with more ammunition to help you resolve the problem quicker.
Yeah, but in the case of the Bolt, it was just the wire came out of the connector, and I just stripped it and slid it back in and tightened it up, and it's working fine now.
Well, that's good to know, because we'll keep it in the back of our heads in case somebody else has that issue.
It could happen. It could
Exactly.
slide out on you, you know, especially if people are connecting it and disconnecting it all the time, you know,
Right.
plug it in. But yeah, it's all set and works fine now.
Awesome.
Thank you for not having to help me.
There, we have a restaurant here. Actually, it went out of business, but the lady that owned it, as you entered, she would say, "Thank you for not cooking."
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Anybody else with questions on the topic or anything else? We've got a little while, about 10 more minutes left, so outstanding. So we won't have any awkward silence marks there. That was the awkward silence.
Almost went without
Again,
it.
So
I know, not bad.
I want to know, where do I buy the lenses that get better the dirtier they get? Those are the lenses I want.
I'll break some awkward silence. Anybody know where I can get someone who will custom cut granite into unique shapes?
Well, we've got a guy
I've
down
tried
the street that'll
multiple
do it.
granite suppliers in the area.
Oh, we've got a guy down the street. Tito will do it.
He's a
He's got a
water jet.
massive CNC.
Well, what about somebody with a water jet? One of these companies that does kitchen counters and stuff. That they got to cut out the sinkholes and all that. Maybe
Yeah,
a
this
water
guy
jet.
wants a piece of granite cut into the shape of Vermont. So
Yeah,
I don't know if I ever left my house, I'd go down to see Tito, but when I get finished with my kitchen cabinets, I got to see him anyway, so he can pull our countertop, so I can put the new cabinets in, and he can put it back. So, but a local, I mean, a little small, they may be able to help you. I know this guy's got a massive CNC.
yeah, I've tried a bunch of guys. Nobody really seems to want to be bothered.
Call up somebody that does countertops and see who they use for their water jet services or their cutting services.
I've investigated and used up pretty much every resource in this area.
Well, if I get to town in the next couple of days, I'll stop in and check and see if he's interested.
Are you saying New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, nobody's willing to take your money?
Correct.
I don't believe
He said it's too small of a job.
Well,
that
how
I-
many do you need?
One.
One.
Oh, well, yeah, that is too small a job. Want to be a scale here?
I wish. I wish I needed 100.
Yeah. And how
I
big?
bet-
Do you like
I bet you if
coaster
you had
size?
100, you'd sell them.
Yeah, that's a small job. What's interesting
Yeah, I
is
don't even know if Tito would do it. He likes
Yeah.
money.
the cutout from a sink would be perfect to cut out the Vermont out of that.
When's Thunder gonna
Anybody
make a
else?
water jet?
No, those
I
suckers
think
are
desktop
expensive.
versions.
Wazer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They just came with a new Pro model. Didn't get very good initial reviews or initial feeling from their specs and pricing. Tiny little thing for the money.
Well, I think we're close enough to killing the recording.
Mhm.